So let's get into the cold plunge.
Yeah.
How does that manifest with you?
Yeah. Do you do deliberate cold exposure?
I do either the ocean, which I did this morning, which is not technically that cold. It's
Well, for the layperson, it is.
It feels cold to me.
62 degrees or something. I do the ocean, or I do a cold tank.
Great.
Away from the ocean. And then I do my swimming pool as long as it's cold. Once it gets warm, I move to the tank.
Great. Well, deliberate cold exposure can come in a couple of different forms. One is to get into the ocean. The other is to get into an ice bath. The other is to get into one of these commercially available circulating cold baths up to the neck. The other is to take a cold shower. And everything I'm about to say pertains to all of those ways of doing it. You can also go outside when it's really cold in a minimum of clothing, provided it's appropriate amounts of clothing, I suppose. That's not as effective because the amount of heat that's transferred from your body outwards is 4 times what it is in the air when you're in water. The Michael Phelps example is a really good one. The reason Michael Phelps could eat 12,000 calories a day is not because he was burning 12,000 calories a day from movement. It's because he was doing that movement in water, and the heat transfer is so much greater. And when you go swimming and you get out, the reason you're really hungry is because you burned a ton of calories.
Oh, interesting.
So for those of you that are actually trying to burn a lot of calories, do your exercise in water, even warm water, and the heat transfer is much greater. This is not often discussed. Okay, some positive effects of deliberate cold exposure. I'll just start with what you need in order to get these effects. It depends on how cold it is. So everyone's going to say, how cold? It should be uncomfortably cold such that your mind is going, I really want to get out, but I can stay in safely, right? Because if somebody runs out there and jumps in 35-degree ice water right now, you can have a heart attack and die. That's not going to happen at 60 degrees unless you have a heart issue to begin with. So the point is, it should feel uncomfortable. You should feel some stress. That stress is the consequence of a molecule called adrenaline, also called epinephrine. Same thing. Don't ask me why they named it the same thing. Scientists like to confuse each other and everybody else. But epinephrine and adrenaline, same thing. When you get into cold water and it's uncomfortable and you have to slow your breathing down, a couple of positive things happen. First of all, adrenaline release is the common generic signature of stress. You are deliberately putting yourself into stress. If you can learn to calm your mind a bit and relax, or at least make it through that, you are becoming more resilient. You're becoming grittier. You know, we hear about grit, resilience, and mental toughness. We have examples of, David Goggins and these people, but you are learning to manage your thinking under conditions of high adrenaline. So the next time someone cuts in front of you or your partner says something really triggering, you will maintain clearer thinking and clearer mode of action, which is absolutely adaptive. So it's great for resilience training. The second thing is that it increases your metabolism, not just while you're in the deliberate cold, but for many, many hours, maybe even days afterwards. And here's the reason. You have fat of the blubbery sort that's called white fat because it's white under the microscope. And then you have beige fat and brown fat, which is dense with mitochondria, which are the energy factories within cells. Deliberate cold exposure that's uncomfortable stimulates more brown fat, which is kind of like the oil in a candle. And it does 2 really important things. It makes you more comfortable at cold temperatures. So if you're somebody who's always feeling cold, you need to crank up your brown fat stores. And this is not blubbery fat. It will help burn off the white fat stores. And then the third and kind of final thing is the reduction in inflammation. Inflammation, we hear all the time. It's bad for your brain, it's bad for your body. It reduces inflammation. So basically what you want to do is get into uncomfortably cold water that is safe for you to stay in for a total of 11 minutes per week. That's what the research says. I'm drawing from peer-reviewed studies.
I'm glad you said per week.
Yeah, per week.
I'm like, I do 3 minutes.
Week. So that could be, 1 minute one day, 2 minutes another day, et cetera. It could be 4 minutes, 3, et cetera.
Interesting. There's an accumulated number.
That's right. So that's the threshold to build up these brown fat stores that will increase your metabolism.
So 11 minutes a week. You don't need
minimum.
Yeah, minimum. You don't need an ocean or a pool. You can do this in a shower.
That's right.
I go on the road. I stay in a hotel. I do it in the shower. I don't stay in there for 10 minutes. But I've been in Boston in January and just sat in there and just fuck it and put it on cold.
It'll wake you up.
It hits a lot harder than the ocean does, and it hits harder than the pool and even the tank. There's something about it's the freezing water just spraying all over yourself. But you can do it. It's doable. Now, I've tried to talk everyone and their brother into doing this stuff, and number one answer is it's cold. It's just like, yes, I know, shithead.
We agree.
I'm not saying we're going in there and enjoying ourselves. I'm saying this is the point. But then How much of it, obviously, you just drilled down on the physiological benefits of the cold plunge. I think there's a strong mental component, even if you can even separate those.
Well, there absolutely is. And first of all, I think anything done in Boston hits a little bit harder. It's just kind of, it's kind of a hard, I remember once just leaning up against a surface in the Boston T station. It's like every surface is cold in winter.
Oh, yeah.
The people are wonderful, but the surfaces are cold. Now, in terms of the mental effects, there are very clear data. Again, I'm only talking about peer-reviewed studies done in humans. So I'm not pulling from a mouse or a worm study here to say that if they've done research where they put human subjects into 60-degree water, which is pretty warm, for an hour, they're just kind of hanging out. They actually put them in lawn chairs hanging out there.
Really?
Or putting people into very cold water of about 45 or 50 degrees, which is going to be a shock to your system, for 20 seconds. And what they observed in both cases is remarkable. Very large, very long-lasting increases in adrenaline, which wakes you up, makes you feel more alert, and dopamine. We all hear about dopamine hits, dopamine, dopamine, dopamine. And everyone thinks that dopamine is the molecule of pleasure. Oh, I eat that ice cream sundae, you get dopamine. Nothing could be more false. What dopamine does is it controls motivation and the desire to pursue things. So getting into cold water, again, if it's really cold water for brief periods of time, but for most people it's going to be about 11 minutes per week, leads to these big, long-lasting increases in dopamine and adrenaline, which are that's the neurotransmitter cocktail of focus and motivation. This is what allows you to be in a good mood and work hard, to pursue things, etc.
Does the dopamine hit come from coming out of the water, like being so glad to be not freezing?
That's right. It doesn't occur right when you're in there. There's this long arc. Yeah. And in fact, there's a wonderful...
like a survival kind of thing.
Yeah, and this has important benefits. So when you don't want your dopamine too low, and you also don't want it spiking too high and crashing. Abusive drugs of abuse like methamphetamine spike dopamine and then crash dopamine. Terrible situation. That's why people go back looking for more. That's why it's so addictive. But dopamine itself is not bad. Long-lasting increases in dopamine are wonderful. And in fact, a colleague of mine at Stanford runs our dual diagnosis addiction clinic. Anna Lemke has a book called Dopamine Nation and talks about this, that she's had patients basically who are addicted to various drugs who have helped get themselves off of drugs by doing things like deliberate cold exposure, because it gives them that feeling of well-being and motivation, but through basically a healthy source.
Yeah.
Yeah.